If you scrolled through social media in early October 2025, you probably saw headlines screaming things like, "Migrant seize federal prison in Portland," "Mayor panics," "Trump unleashes Operation No Mercy Marines." The first feeling? As if the entire United States was about to catch fire, all because of one small city along the Willamette River. But you know what? Reality is often smaller than the rumor. And Portland, a city used to reign, now found itself drowning in a storm of media frenzy. Those sensational headlines spread like wildfire, turning Portland into a symbol of America's collapse under far-left control. But what was the truth? According to the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, only a few dozen protesters gathered around the ICE office in the South Waterfront district each night. By mid-October, there had been a total of 53 arrests since the beginning of summer. There were no 100 nights of riots, no prison takeovers, and certainly no scenes of the military surrounding the city. And yet, on the internet, the imagery looked straight out of an apocalypse movie. So, who directed that movie? The real story of Portland wasn't about riots, it was about clashing layers of government, about the gap between media perception and on-the-ground reality, and more deeply, about a power struggle and crisis of trust between federal and local authorities. Starting in June 2025, the movement opposing federal immigration policies began to spread across Portland. The immediate trigger came when the Trump administration revived Operation Midway Blitz, a nationwide campaign to crack down on undocumented immigrants. In many cities, arrests happened quietly, but in Portland, long known for its progressive politics and sanctuary city policies, that decision crossed a line for many residents. Immigrant rights activists, NGOs, and local citizens began gathering around the ICE facility at 4300 South Macadam Avenue, carrying banners reading "Stop ICE Abuse" and "No Kids in Cages." It started peacefully, but all it took was a few carefully edited clips, and suddenly, the entire nation was convinced that Portland had fallen into chaos. The protest began with songs and ended with the screams of the media. Within hours, people holding banners were rebranded as Antifa, and Portland was framed as a war zone, a perfect edit for a movie no one except Washington had ordered to be made. One side shouted freedom, the other order. And you, if you had only 15 seconds to decide who's right, would you click based on emotion or search for the truth? Meanwhile, the state of Oregon and Portland's city government opposed the deployment of federal troops. Governor Tina Kotek vowed to sue the White House if 200 National Guard soldiers were sent into the city.
That Oregon National Guard troops should go home, as well as the California National Guard troops should go back to California.
This was no longer just a clash between protesters and police. It had become a power struggle between Washington, D.C. and local authorities. According to publicly released data from the Portland Police Bureau, PPB, on October 4th, PPB arrested 2 people for disorderly conduct in the second degree. On October 12th, 2 more were arrested, bringing the total to 49 arrests since the start of summer. On October 18th, 3 additional arrests were made, a total of 53 arrests linked to ICE-related protests. Notably, most incidents occurred at night, involving only 20 to 50 people with no major property damage or casualties. Meanwhile, data from the ICE Portland field office, published by Oregon Public Broadcasting (OPB), showed that the facility detained an average of 1.13 individuals per day between mid-June and early July, far lower than claims that the facility had shut down for 22 days due to protests. In short, the data didn't support the narrative of a besieged Portland. But that didn't stop online media from turning a few tense nights into a political battleground. One detail that drew little attention: Portland didn't just respond with words, it fought back with law. On September 18, 2025, the City Planning Bureau issued a land use violation notice against the ICE headquarters, accusing the facility of detaining individuals for more than 12 hours, a breach of the permit granted in 2011.
Land use conditions of approval 25 times in 10 months by detaining people for more than 12 hours or keeping them overnight.
It was a symbolic move, a city using zoning regulations to challenge a federal agency. According to the city attorney, ICE was ordered to cease overnight detentions or face civil penalties and possible revocation of its land use license. ICE declined to comment, but according to AP News, the action angered the White House, turning Portland into a dangerous precedent for other sanctuary cities. At a September 27th press conference, President Trump announced plans to deploy federal forces to Portland to restore order and protect national facilities. However, after the state of Oregon filed suit in federal court, the plan was suspended. The courtroom had become Portland's new line of defense.
Joined 21 other attorneys general and 3 governors.
Reporters from Cat2 News and KGW News confirmed that the actual number of protesters was far smaller than the hundreds claimed by some conservative outlets. Participants were mostly local residents, civic groups, and lawful immigrants opposing detention policies. There was no evidence of organized Antifa or domestic terror involvement. A journalist from OPB described the scene. Many protesters sat on sidewalks, played guitars, handed out free food, and talked with police. The atmosphere was tense, but not chaotic. The truth is, no one films people sitting and singing peacefully. Social media only loves what burns. The louder the flames, the easier it is to believe. Still, there were a few minor scuffles. On October 11th, police arrested one person for 4th-degree assault and harassment. By the end of October, PPB records showed no serious injuries and no public property burned. But all it took was a cleverly cut clip, a man in handcuffs being dragged onto a flatbed cart, and suddenly social media turned Portland into a war zone. That video came from ICE itself. Then the New York Post reposted it. Dozens of pro-Trump YouTube channels recycled it, and just like that, reality disappeared in the digital smoke. The result? Truth distorted. There was no war, yet Portland was wounded, not by violence, but by fear. By mid-2025, major companies began scaling back their downtown operations. Wells Fargo announced it would cut 50 positions and vacate its central office before year's end. Downtown Portland's vacancy rate rose from 33.3% to 34.6% in a single quarter. Analysts argued that this exodus wasn't caused solely by protests, but by a chain reaction: higher security costs, a tarnished image, and collapsing investor confidence. Celebrity chef and restaurateur Lisa Schroeder posted a photo of her empty dining room on Instagram with the caption, "Portland still has good people, but they no longer come out." The economy weakened not because of fire and smoke, but because of lost trust. Even small, mostly peaceful protests were branded lawless, driving away both investors and tourists. Since those edited riot clips began circulating, Portland has become the perfect battleground for propaganda. Far-right channels use footage of protesters as proof that America is collapsing under progressive rule. Meanwhile, some left-wing activists posted videos showing police and ICE officers responding with excessive force, using tear gas and riot shields to disperse small groups. Between these two conflicting streams of information, the truth gradually vanished. They built small music stages, brought stuffed animals into the streets, and carried satirical signs reading, "We're not Antifa, just sleepy Portlanders who know our rights." That was how the city chose to respond, with laughter, not tear gas. From a political perspective, the Portland episode reflects a deep fracture within American society. To Trump supporters, Portland symbolizes chaos, the failure of freedom and progressive ideals. To liberals, it stands for resilience, a city brave enough to defend human rights under federal pressure. In reality, it sits somewhere in between. Portland is both a sanctuary for migrants and a flashpoint of ideological conflict. The police are caught between two opposing demands, one side calling for crackdowns, the other insisting on respecting protest rights. Even the Portland Police Bureau has been dragged into the political crossfire. A former officer told OPB anonymously, "If we act, they call it oppression. If we stand still, they call it cowardice. In Portland, being a cop means you're wrong to half the country no matter what you do." Looking back, the Portland protests of 2025 were not an uprising. They were a test for American democracy, a moment when the government, the media, and the public had to learn how to see truth beyond the walls of prejudice. And perhaps that's exactly what it was. Portland 2025 proved that in an age where information moves faster than truth, we must learn to pause, even for just a few seconds, before we believe. The truth is simple. There were protests, there were minor clashes, there were arrests, but there was no street war. The tensions between the federal government and the state of Oregon were stretched tight, yet the rule of law still functioned, through lawsuits, resolutions, and public court rulings. What the world saw of Portland came mostly in 30-second clips and screaming headlines, but if you take the time to open the reports from PPB, AP News, OPB, and Reuters, you'll find a city struggling to stay balanced between freedom and order, compassion and discipline. Portland is not an occupied city. It is simply a magnified reflection of what America is going through. Portland 2025 is a snapshot of our era, An age where information outruns truth, where every crowd becomes a weapon of narrative. Yet beneath that fog, there are still people. Police, journalists, protesters, trying to keep the debate within the boundaries of a mature democracy. Portland is not an occupied city. It is simply a magnified reflection of what America's going through. That was the closing line of The Guardian's editorial, published on October 3, 2025. A single sentence that somehow captured the mood of a nation looking into its own mirror. In a time when falsehood spreads faster than fact and shouting drowns out reason, that closing line still echoes. A quiet reminder that amidst the noise, there are people who want to understand, not just to scream. It's not just about Portland, it's about America itself, a country still learning to balance freedom and order, emotion and evidence, faith and doubt. And perhaps that's why The Guardian ended its article in a tone both cold and compassionate. Not to condemn, not to justify, but to remind us that truth, however small, still deserves to be heard. It was the closing sentence of an era, a time when 15-second videos could define an entire city, and only those patient enough to read to the very last line could see the real picture. Truth is never loud. In Portland, it lives in the smallest numbers. 2 arrests, 3 protesters, 1 police report, and yet, those are what keep America from slipping off the orbit of reason.